Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to be giving my official September 11th Iceberg. There are some disclaimers I want to announce before I begin. The topics in relation to September 11th that I'm going to be discussing deal in multiple layers, some conspiratorial, some based off events on September 11th specifically. I do not endorse these theories necessarily, and like a typical internet iceberg, I will begin with the more normal topics and get deeper and deeper as the video goes on. This is not even close to everything in regards to September 11th, but it is a significant amount of information. So without further ado, let's get right into the iceberg, starting with Tier 1, which begins with Building 7. WTC 7 was a 47-story building located within the World Trade Center complex in NYC. On September 11th, it became the first known tall building to collapse, primarily due to uncontrolled fires. It was damaged from debris of the north and south towers, which had collapsed in the morning. The building's sprinkler system failed due to a lack of water pressure, allowing the fires to burn unchecked for several hours. At 5:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, after all of the firefighters had evacuated the building collapsed in an extremely peculiar fashion. Previously, fires had caused damage to high-rise buildings, but none had collapsed in a near-symmetrical free-fall manner like WTC 7. And another oddity was the BBC reporting Building 7 had already collapsed prematurely. At 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 20 minutes before the building would actually collapse, the BBC aired a live report stating that the building had already fallen. Roughly 5 minutes later, the BBC's satellite feed cut out due to a reported technical issue. The term jet fuel steel beams relates to the expression that jet fuel cannot melt steel beams, which is a true statement. Jet fuel burns at a maximum temperature around 1500 degrees Fahrenheit. Steel melts at approximately 2500 degrees Fahrenheit, which is obviously much higher than the temperatures reached by the burning jet fuel alone. This is in relation to the point that jet fuel and the resulting fires caused the Twin Towers to collapse. A main counter of this would be that steel doesn't necessarily need to melt for either of the Twin Towers to collapse. The structural integrity of the towers were severely damaged by the weakening steel. Structural steel weakened significantly at around 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, and it said that the sag of the floors on top of each other led to the initial collapse, which then triggered a progressive chain reaction leading to the full structural failure. Flight 93 shot down is in reference to United Airlines Flight 93 crashing into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania on September 11th. This coming after passengers had attempted to retake control of the hijacked airplane. However, there has been speculation that the plane may have been shot down by the U.S. military to prevent it from reaching its intended target, which was likely either going to be the White House or the U.S. Capitol. The reason people believe that it was shot down rather than it crashing is based off of a number of things, most notably the abnormal debris field, which carried miles past the original crash site. Officials say the reason was because of wind patterns. The vice president at the time, Dick Cheney, was also reported to have authorized the military to shoot down the hijacked airplanes that morning. Some witnesses in Pennsylvania reported seeing a fireball, although I should note it is very difficult to trust eyewitness reports. Another thing that would lead some people to believe that it was shot down was due to the time. Flight 93 took significantly longer to make its turn back to its intended target. This was mainly thought to be because of hijacker hesitation. Bin Laden is in reference to the Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, who has been credited as the mastermind behind the September 11th attacks. He specifically strongly opposed U.S. stationing troops in Saudi Arabia after the Gulf War in 1991. He also condemned U.S. financial and military support of Israel, especially in conflicts with Palestinians. Bin Laden also blamed the U.S. for enforcing economic sanctions on Iraq in the 1990s as a reason for the attacks. On September 16th of 2001, 5 days after September 11th, bin Laden initially denied responsibility for the September 11th attacks. It wasn't until a 2004 video, which came out just days before the 2004 US presidential election, in which bin Laden openly admitted to orchestrating the attacks. Pentagon missile refers to the idea that the Pentagon was not struck with a plane, but with some sort of military missile on September 11th. This theory is based on the fact that there is extremely low-quality security footage of the plane coming into contact with the Pentagon. If you pause the only security video we have, it does appear to be the nose of a plane appearing, although the video has extremely bad frame rate and low resolution. Another reason people are wary of this event is because of the pilot precision to be able to fly so close to the ground and impact a more horizontal, not vertical, building like the Pentagon. This theory has been widely debunked, most notably by eyewitnesses hearing the plane's loud engines along with plane parts being found within the wreck. Stairwell A is a reference to the only workable stairwell in either of the Twin Towers after the planes had impacted the buildings. There were a total of 3 main stairwells within each building. Because of the direct middle impact, all 3 stairwells were severed within the North Tower, but because the way the plane impacted the South Tower, it was more of a side collision, Stairwell A was spared and was accessible for people to escape from the upper floors above the impact zone. August 6th briefing is in reference to a morning briefing U.S. President George W. Bush received on August 6th, a little over a month before September 11th. The briefing was titled, quote, "Bin Laden determined to strike in U.S." The briefing was delivered to Bush at his ranch in Texas, contained intelligence reports indicating that bin Laden and al-Qaeda were planning to attack on U.S. soil. It specifically noted that bin Laden was determined to carry out an attack, but it did not provide specific details on the time, location, or method of the attack. Florida training refers to the training that the hijacker pilots received before the attack. Mohammed Atta, the lead hijacker on American Airlines Flight 11, took flight lessons from Hoffman Aviation School in Florida in 2000 and also early 2001. The flight instructor who taught Atta the plane operations later testified, "What's interesting is they did not receive direct training on flying large aircrafts like the Boeing planes that they would later pilot, but they did receive basic flying skills and navigational techniques which helped enable them to take control of the planes." Saudi connection is in reference to the fact that 15 out of the 19 hijackers were Saudi citizens, and long-standing suspicions that individuals within Saudi Arabia, primarily including government officials, had some level of involvement or knowledge of the attacks, including one key suspect who was a Saudi nationalist in San Diego, who reportedly provided assistance to 2 hijackers and had ties to Saudi intelligence. Recent documents that were declassified in 2021 exposed the fact that officials within Saudi Arabia had knowledge of a potential terror attack happening in America. Stock fun is in relation to the strange amount of stock manipulation that happened in the days leading up to September 11th. In those days, there was an unusual high amount of volume of put options, which profit when a stock drops on both American Airlines and United Airlines. It should be noted that, curiously enough, this was not a universal trend in early September of 2001. American Airlines and United Airlines both saw big money bet against their stocks in specific, but it was not an industry trend, meaning there was not big money bet against other airline stocks. Both of those airlines were obviously involved in September 11th, and their stock prices subsequently decreased. Magic Passport is in reference to a passport that was found after the Twin Towers were hit, but before they collapsed in New York City on September 11th. The passport supposedly belonged to one of the muscle hijackers that was aboard American Airlines Flight 11, the airplane that crashed into the North Tower. According to reports, his passport was discovered near the World Trade Center wreckage by a civilian and was handed over to the NYC police to be investigated. This was all to have happened within the period of time of the plane hitting the building and the collapse, because if the building had collapsed, obviously the mass amount of debris would have covered up the supposed passport. The discovery has been subject to a lot of skepticism and conspiracy theories, as people have questioned how a paper passport could survive the intense explosion. However, it should be noted that it is somewhat reasonable for lightweight materials like paper to survive impacts like that, although the odds on one of the hijackers' passport surviving and tumbling to the ground after that impact, and then for it to also be subsequently recovered before either of the buildings collapsed, seems extremely low. Atta Main Trip is in reference to a last-minute trip that lead hijacker Muhammad Atta and fellow muscle hijacker Abdul Al-Mari took on September 10th, the day before 9/11. On the evening of September 10th, they both drove from Boston to South Portland, Maine, and checked into a Comfort Inn near the Portland Jetport. It is said that they did this possibly to try and avoid the higher security of the Boston airport. The idea would be to utilize the smaller Portland airport with more laxed security and use the Boston flight as a connector, so flying from Portland to Boston and then not having to go through security in Boston because you already went through it in Portland. Atta and the fellow hijacker ran some errands on the night of September 10th, including going to a Pizza Hut as well as Walmart. They were on a CCTV camera withdrawing money at an ATM as well. Atta's luggage, which was supposed to be transferred from Portland to Flight 11, was left behind in Boston due to a missed connection. Authorities were then able to recover his will, flight training manuals, and other documents. Larry Silverstein refers to the owner of the World Trade Center complex when September 11th happened. There are certainly some oddities in relation to Silverstein. He purchased the complex in July of 2001, just months before 9/11, securing the lease evaluation around $3.2 billion. After acquiring the lease, Silverstein immediately insured the buildings, including coverage for terrorist attacks. Now, there is some debate on whether or not terrorism insurance was common at the time, but to be fair, it is understandable considering the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Silverstein, on September 11th, was notably absent from the Twin Towers, a place he had been religiously every weekday since acquiring the complex. He would normally have breakfast on the Windows on the World restaurant high up within the North Tower, but on September 11th had a orthodontist appointment. Both his son and daughter, who also worked inside the World Trade Center complex, were absent on that day. In a 2002 PBS interview, Silverstein can be heard recalling the collapse of Building 7 by saying, quote, we've had such a terrible loss of life, maybe the smartest thing to do is to pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and we watched the building collapse. He claims he was saying pull it in terms of pulling the operation, meaning pull all of the firefighters away from Building 7. Definitely an odd choice of words. Silverstein ended up getting a payment around $4.2 billion, which was subsequently mostly reinvested back into the rebuild of the World Trade Center complex. $2.3 trillion is in reference to a speech given by Donald Rumsfeld on September 10th, the day before 9/11. He stated that the Pentagon could not account for $2.3 trillion in transactions, essentially admitting that the money was untraceable due to outdated accounting systems. The section of the Pentagon that was hit on September 11th housed the Office of Naval Intelligence and DoD accounting offices investigating financial discrepancies. Some speculate this attack destroyed key evidence that would be relevant to the missing $2.3 trillion. After September 11th, the focus on the Pentagon financial mismanagement completely disappeared because of the terrorist event. Operation Bojangles is in reference to a failed terrorist plot that was supposed to take place in the mid-1990s, a few years before September 11th, involving bombing 11 airplanes simultaneously in flight. Another part of the plan involved hijacking an airplane and crashing it into the CIA headquarters in Virginia. Khaled Sheikh Mohammed was a key architect of Operation Bojangles and later became a mastermind behind September 11th. Bojangles was seen more as a trial run for September 11th. After the failure, Al Qaeda shifted its focus from bombs to hijacks, and in turn focused its target on U.S. landmarks and important buildings like the World Trade Center complex and potentially the White House. Cleveland Turn refers to Flight 93, which was the flight that crashed in Pennsylvania, making its turn back to its intended target after the hijacking just south of Cleveland. This was unusual and not part of the original hijacking plan. The theory is that the hijackers aboard Flight 93 got cold feet and hesitated, waiting until the plane was over Ohio to initiate the hijack and subsequent turn. This would help enable the passengers of Flight 93 to understand what was going on, communicating with the ground regarding the other hijackings, with the realization that the plane was intended to eventually be crashed. There was also some confusing reports that suggested United Flight 93 had actually landed at Cleveland Hopkins Airport. Obviously, those rumors were incorrect. Hamburg Cell is in reference to a former Islamic terrorist cell located in Hamburg, Germany. The members of the cell were all main contributors in September 11th. The group formed in the late 1990s among Arab students attending Hamburg universities. By 1999, the group sought training from Al Qaeda. This happened in Afghanistan, where Osama bin Laden and senior Al Qaeda leaders recruited them for the eventual 9/11. The members of the cell moved to the United States in 2000, with several of them becoming the hijacker pilots. They took flight lessons in Florida. One of the reasons the cell was able to operate going pretty much completely undetected was because at the time Germany had relatively lax surveillance on Islamic extremists. Dancing Israelis is a reference to 5 Israeli men who were perched from an advantageous position in clear view of both towers, dancing, posing, and celebrating with a camera as the towers burned in the background on the morning of September 11th. It was so noticeable, a bystander who was looking at the towers with binoculars over top of the parking lot in which the men were located reported the 5 men to police along with their white van, which supposedly was part of their moving company, Urban Movers. The men left in their white van sometime after both of the towers were hit. Later on the afternoon of September 11th, at around 3 o'clock, an alert went out to police to look for this white van. A few hours later, it was located. The 5 Israelis originally denied having involvement in the event, saying their position was just a coincidence and that they got there after the first building was hit. There are differing reports on this, but it was later said that the white van was seen there at around 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time before the first plane was hit. The U.S. government has confirmed there are photographs that exist of the 5 men smiling, laughing, and even in one instance holding up a lighter right under where one of the towers was burning. There are around 80 photos total. The arrested Israelis were caught with money in their socks and tested positive for explosive residue in the van and on their clothing. The company that they had worked for was later found to be a shell company started by another Israeli. When the FBI went to question him 3 days after September 11th, he fled to Israel. Let's Roll is in reference to a statement made by United 93 passenger Todd Beamer, who was on the phone with an operator at the time, and you could hear him say in the background, quote, "Are you ready? Okay, let's roll," in regards to trying to take back control of the airplane from the hijackers. Of course, at this point, it was already known that the 3 other planes had been hijacked and flown into the Twin Towers and the Pentagon, and their plane was inevitably doomed if they did nothing. Jewish art students is in reference to the reports of a group of young Israelis, many of them claiming to be art students, inside the United States before September 11th and allegedly engaging in suspicious activities near federal buildings, DEA offices, and even locations associated with the 9/11 hijackers. In 2001, the DEA issued an internal memo about Israeli nationalists posing as art students visiting government facilities under questionable circumstances. These students were all reportedly attempting to sell artwork, and in some instances entering restricted areas of government buildings. The report suggested they were conducting some kind of intelligence gathering operation. Some reports claim that certain art students lived near the 9/11 hijackers in places like Hollywood, Florida. That would have been a location where the hijacker pilots would have been training. There was speculation that the students were spying on Al-Qaeda operatives, possibly on behalf of the Israeli intelligence Mossad. Vegas meeting refers to an important meeting led by the most influential 9/11 hijackers. At least 5 of the hijackers visited Las Vegas multiple times between May and August of 2001. They stayed at low-budget hotels and reportedly visited strip clubs, casinos, and bars, possibly being done as a last hurrah before September 11th. The meetings were mainly focused around the pilot hijackers, and I make the distinction between the pilot hijackers and the muscle hijackers. It would make sense that they would have advanced meetings and advanced knowledge, considering there are rumors that they were the only ones that had advanced knowledge of the actual event. There are people that say the muscle hijackers, the ones that were just there to overwhelm and hijack the airplane, didn't know they were going to die until the night or the morning of September 11th. Las Vegas casinos allowed cash transactions, which are harder to trace. It's a possible reason why the Vegas visits, along with it being a neutral meeting point. Power Down WTC is in reference to an alleged major power outage that took place the weekend before September 11th. This would have taken place on September 8th and September 9th. Scott Forbes, who was a former employee inside of the World Trade Center, had claimed that the offices in the second World Trade Center, the South Tower, had a power down event that supposedly lasted about 36 hours from Saturday morning until Sunday afternoon. He said that they disabled security cameras and electronic systems. However, there is no record or confirmation that this event even exists from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Climbing down the tower refers to a man that attempted to scale down the side of the North Twin Tower in an escape attempt. He would have had to shimmy himself against both sides of the slit outer wall, in which, confirmed on video, he was able to shift himself down about 10 floors before. And this part is mainly speculation, but with the South Tower collapsing, it potentially caused him to fall off. It has been disputed whether he made it down 10 floors or 20 floors, but there are some photos of a broken window directly next to him, and unfortunately, with the way the Twin Towers worked, there would have been no way to maneuver over that window or even know there was a broken window on the other side of the slit wall. The Nauduit film refers to the documentary captured by French filmmakers on September 11th. Their film, which was originally intended to follow a rookie firefighter through New York City, became the only known footage of the first plane hitting the North Tower. It was filmed by a total coincidence, as the video shows a somewhat mundane scene of a firefighter doing a routine inspection of a gas leak. Suddenly, a plane can be heard buzzing overhead, in which eyewitnesses recalled peculiar, considering with how loud New York City is. You normally don't hear planes that obnoxiously, and that is the plane that ended up crashing directly into the North Tower. The footage also displayed the lobby inside the North Tower before either buildings collapsed. It's extremely eerie footage, knowing the building is already doomed, because at that point, the filming on the interior of the lobbies was done after the buildings had been hit. Clean break memo is in reference to a memo that was originally created in 1996 as a policy document written for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu by a group of neoconservative strategists. The memo outlined a strategy for Israel to reshape its regional security policy. This memo happened to specifically include the removal of Saddam Hussein from power in Iraq, and also taking a more aggressive stance towards its neighbors. The United States, under Bill Clinton, who was president until 2001, was more focused on a more peaceful approach, promoting negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. He was not interested in a regime change in Iraq like the Clean Break memo had suggested, and instead pursued sanctions along with airstrikes. But after September 11th, the same original authors of the Clean Break memo were extremely instrumental in pushing the United States to invade Iraq, which they claimed was necessary in part because of September 11th. And at that point, they did have significant public support because of the horrible terror event. Elevators is in reference to the elevator system that malfunctioned as an effect of the planes crashing into the Twin Towers. The elevator system inside the towers operated with both local and express elevators all connected through two sky lobbies located on the 44th and 78th floor, which were the main congestion points of the buildings. When the buildings were impacted, some of the express elevator cars completely broke off, causing them to drop all the way to the bottom, which created extremely loud noises, which some interpreted as bomb sounds. The elevators also functioned as chimneys, as heavy smoke built up inside the extremely tall express elevator shafts. Fireballs that were ignited by jet fuel shot down the elevator shafts all the way to the lobby. The exact second the towers were impacted, the elevators immediately stopped working, causing people to be trapped between floors if they were in the elevators at the time of the impacts. The sprinkler system flooded several of the elevator shafts before the buildings collapsed. Epstein Paper Planes refers to a painting called War Games that was found in Jeffrey Epstein's townhome in New York, depicting the 43rd President of the United States, George W. Bush, sitting down with a smile on his face holding a paper airplane along with two piles of Jenga blocks. The painting is presented in a subjective way to make it seem like the piles were once Jenga towers, potentially depicting the Twin Towers that are now collapsed with Bush laughing sitting behind them. With the connections that Jeffrey Epstein had, the painting could be interpreted a number of ways. It could be just some kind of sick joke in relation to W. Bush's leadership, or it could be a hint that there was some type of involvement within the Bush administration on September 11th. Epstein himself donated to both Democrats and Republicans, although his political donations were mainly to Democrats. He did have relationships within the Bush administration, like many powerful billionaires. The painting itself was described to originally be a critique of George W. Bush's handling of September 11th and the Iraq War, but it is certainly interesting that Epstein had it in his possession. LOL Superman is in reference to a YouTube video that may or may not have existed in relation to the 9/11 jumpers. The video, whose existence has been disputed, was said to have originally depicted an individual filming people jumping from the towers. The video would have been shot within the World Trade Center plaza and would be the only extremely close jumper footage we have. It is said that the video existed on the early days of YouTube, likely in between the years 2006 and 2009. Around 2014, YouTube purged many graphic September 11th videos, in part to appease advertisers. It is said that the video either never actually existed, and the amount of testimony we have claiming the video exists only as part of the Mandela effect, or the video actually did exist in the infancy of YouTube and was scrubbed without anyone archiving it. Core still standing refers to the building cores of the North and South Tower remaining upright for around 10 to 15 seconds after the initial collapse of the Twin Towers. If you look closely at the towers' collapses, you will notice remnants of both of the cores still upright. This was something I discovered by accident when I was watching the towers collapse a few years ago. It intrigues me, the idea that there were still parts of the towers remaining upright, even if it was only for 10 to 15 seconds. It's speculated that the areas that were still standing were mainly bathrooms and elevator shafts, which is what was contained within the building core. Interestingly enough, even though remnants of the core lasted a little bit longer than the entirety of the building, it was always doomed the second the building fell. The core at that point was already structurally compromised. Building 6 is in reference to the lightly talked about Building Number 6 located inside of the World Trade Center complex. Buildings 4, 5, and 6 were largely irrelevant, 9-story office buildings that surrounded the Twin Towers. The fascination of Building 6 comes from the giant crater left in the middle of it, with all of its outer walls still intact. The North Tower would have done the main damage to Building 6 based off of its location. Some speculate this hole existed even before the towers collapsed. In any event, it's an extremely weird debris pattern. The building's main purpose was to handle customs enforcement, trade, compliance, and financial regulation. There is speculation regarding a potential internal explosion that could have caused the massive crater, although to be fair, it does seem extremely unlikely explosions would have caused Building 6 to collapse, considering the relative insignificance of the building. Holographics refer to the conspiracy theory that the airplanes that crashed into the North and South Tower were not real physical planes, but rather advanced holograms projected into the sky, possibly accompanied by missiles or explosions to create the idea of destruction. This includes the no plane theory, which suggests that the planes could not have penetrated the Twin Towers so cleanly and that the impacts lacked typical aircraft crash debris, such as wings breaking off or engines falling to the ground. However, with planes traveling around 500 miles per hour, the visual that showed the airplane basically being engulfed by the building is understandable due to the speed of the plane. This conspiracy theory is widely dismissed by even people that significantly distrust the story on September 11th. No hijackers is in reference to the theory that the airplanes were controlled remotely without any actual hijacker involved in their crashes. This theory claims that the planes were taken over using advanced military technology and flown into their targets. It suggests that the alleged hijackers were either patsies or were never on the planes in the first place. Some of the theories draw similarities to Operation Northwoods, which is a declassified 1960s U.S. military plan that proposed a false flag attack to justify war. Gore floor is in reference to the 78th floor on the South Tower, aka one of the main hubs of the building. It was a sky lobby where it is thought that many people gathered in an attempt to exit the building after the North Tower was hit. And of course, we know initially people were told to remain in the South Tower. It was part of the protocol because of potential falling debris from the North Tower. People didn't know it was intentional initially, although eventually they did decide to start evacuating. With so many people congregated in a single area, Flight 175 struck the tower and it impacted that exact area, hence the name Gore Floor. Hell Floor refers to an entire floor within the North Tower that was completely engulfed in flames. Due to the Twin Towers' open floor plan, fire was spread a lot easier, with furniture and office supplies spreading the flames. There was a distinct floor from the North Tower that you could tell just from ground level was completely on fire. It makes sense that the North Tower would more likely to have a floor fully engulfed than the South, considering fires burnt a lot longer in the North as it was hit first but fell last. So guys, that is going to do it for my official 9/11 Iceberg. I probably will be doing a 2.0 version, if I'm going to be honest, considering there is a lot of stuff I did not cover. So look out for that in the future, and thank you for watching.